Hello, everyone. Welcome and good morning to the Basics of Game Making panel as presented by XPRIZE Connect and Eline Media. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. My name is Steve, and today we're going to be talking about what it takes to make video games with some experts from around the industry and how you might be able to get started with some programs that we've got going on here. We've got Eric in the chat channels, and so later on we're going to be doing an audience Q&A. So if you're interacting with us on whatever platform you're watching this on, feel free to say hello to Eric and make sure if you've got questions to drop them into that chat, and then we'll be sure to ask our experts. And speaking of, I think now it is time to actually meet our experts. So, hey guys.
Hey.
Hi, Steve.
What's up, guys? Hey, my name is Natalie Mesnard, and I am the master instructor at Eline Media. Before the COVID-19 era, I taught in our youth game making studios in New York City and New Jersey, which was wonderful. And alas, not any longer. But the good news is I now teach online the same topics that I taught in our in-person studios, which are, of course, game design and coding. So I'm your teacher in residence here, and I'm all about the process of learning game making and sort of how to do that in a way that's pretty fun. So that's what I'm about.
Thanks, Natalie.
Hey everybody, my name is Heather Chandler and I make video games. I've been a game producer for the past 23 years and I've collaborated with lots of engineers, artists, and designers to create games on pretty much every platform. Some of these games you may know of, like Fortnite, and I've also worked on a game called Never Alone. You can see the poster behind Brian, and other really fun, cool games. When I was in school, I had a passion for math, science, and art, and I wanted something that combined all of these things, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I hadn't really thought about making games because I thought you had to be a programmer. But when I got my first job, I realized that there were so many different ways to contribute to the game. And I'm very excited about this competition because I think this is a great way to show you guys that there's all different skills you use to make a game. And the key is to find a group of people. I know that there's a team component to this, that you can work together to make a game. Or if you're somebody who wants to try all of the things, you can do that as well. I'm super excited to be here with you guys and to show everybody that while playing games is fun, making them is better.
Cool, thanks. We're going to actually explore a lot of those things that you brought up a little bit later on. And now...
Hi, guys. I'm Brian Alsbach. I am the Executive Vice President of Education here at Eline Media. Eline is a video game company that makes games that have some sort of an educational or impact angle to them, and I lead our education efforts there. One of the areas I'm particularly interested in is teaching young people how to make their own video games and introducing them to the processes of game making and coding. And it's something I've been working on for about 10 years. So as part of that, I have made games that are all about that, including a couple of titles we've released here at Eline Media that you can actually use to make games in the Code Games Challenge. One of them is a platform called GameStar Mechanic, and another is a platform called The Endless Mission. I've done some work on other commercial games, including Never Alone that you see behind me that Heather mentioned. And I've also helped design learning programs and competitions that are ways for young people to get started making games as well. So I'm one of the designers behind the Code Games Challenge that we're talking about today that's presenting this webinar. And so as we get through today's session, hopefully I can answer some questions you might have about how the competition works and how it's structured and how to enter, how to win, how to do stuff like that.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time to introduce yourselves. Some of you kind of hit on it a little bit as we were kind of going around learning who you were and what your background was, but I would like to dive in a little bit more considering what this is about and the path that I think each of you took to get into game making. Heather, you brought up a fact that like you were not necessarily a coder or anything like that, but you found your way into games. And then I'd like to explore that with each of you as well as to how you found yourselves here. And then what type of skill sets actually took you from where you were to where you are now?
Wow, that's a great question. And of course, I always love chatting about myself. I got my start in the game industry. I got an entry-level job at Activision, and basically it was a job where you got to play games for a living. I spent a lot of time play testing different games that they were making. I also spent a lot of time playing just different other types of games to kind of see what worked and what didn't work. Skill-wise, as far as what my background was before I got there, I was just somebody, I had a college degree, but I had a high level of curiosity and a desire to keep learning and to find something that combined sort of art, technology in a fun way. I was always interested in the entertainment business because I wanted to create something that we could share with other people, because there is such a thrill when you talk to people and they're like, I play Fortnite, and you mention that you work on it and they're like, wow, that's so amazing. Then they want to know all the things like, how did you make this? Do you have V-Bucks for me? So my career really was, I didn't really know what I was doing. I kind of got a job in the game industry. I figured out it was a really good fit. And once I realized that, I said, okay, where do I want to go in the industry? And I looked at all the different roles. There's artists, designers, programmers, producers. I figured that production was a good role for me because I really enjoy working with people. And it's very important, I think, when a game team has somebody who is there to, first of all, make sure people have the things that they need and can solve problems for them. Because when you are a creative person, an artist, designer, and engineer, you want to be able to focus on what it is you need to do. So if you have someone like me, I can come in and help you solve your problems. And there is an element of budgets and schedules that producers also deal with, which is sort of the part that the team doesn't care as much about, but other people do. And I would say that as I went on my journey to become a producer, I focused in on how to enhance my leadership skills, enhance my communication skills, project management skills. But I also spent time learning about how each of the disciplines work. So I know just enough about art, design, and engineering to have good conversations with people to figure out how I can help them or what's going on with the game, or to perhaps help debug things.
Perfect. Thanks. Brian,
Yeah, like Heather, I sort of have always been a little bit of a jack of all trades kind of guy, and I like doing a bunch of different stuff. But I'll go back to when I was in high school. And when I was in high school, way back in the late 1800s, we were really fortunate in that they took what was an old wood shop in the high school and they turned it into a TV studio, and they brought in all the stuff you would need to do TV production. And back in the day, that was a little bit more involved than it is now, because now you have a computer and a webcam and you can do that like we're doing now. Back then you needed all this equipment and control rooms, full of stuff, and big studio cameras, and tape to tape editors and crazy things. But just having access to that and really getting to work in a studio and producing stuff for the local TV channel really intrigued me about the process of making media. And years later, I got my degree in English. I spent a lot of time doing technology stuff because independently I had learned how to program as a hobbyist. But years later, some folks that I had worked with previously, got the idea of starting a game company that did games with an educational or impact angle to them. And that really resonated with me, and really the education side of it as well. And as I got to know the game making process a little bit more, coming to it with somewhat of a technical background in other areas and somewhat of a, management producing background too, I really got intrigued by it. And it reminded me of when I was in the TV studio, back in high school, working together on a team, that kind of culture. And games are just such a fascinating mix when you have a game team of the technical disciplines and the creative disciplines, right? And it's not like there aren't a lot of other processes that are like that, where you need both kind of folks on a team to really be successful. And I just thought, wow, what a great way to create really interesting, authentic educational experiences for young people around coding, and around other, the other creative disciplines like the 3D modeling or art that go into game making, and really got intrigued by that and sort of made it a mission to bring some of those kind of experiences like I had back in the TV studio in high school to other people through game making.
Awesome. Brian, I always feel like we have so much in common in the history that led us into game making. So what I would want to say to anyone that's interested in being in the game industry, if that's you, the way I like to think about it is, if you feel like you're someone who doesn't fit in a box, this is the industry for you. And that's what I hear in both of those stories that you guys just went into. And I feel like I'm exactly that same type of person. You know, when I was younger, it was like, why are you doing all these different things? So I was really interested in math. And when I went into college, I actually was ahead in math coming in. So my advisors there said, why don't you just major in math and you'll be able to graduate in 3 years? And I was like, awesome. So I love math. I'm this technical thinker. I love to think deeply about logic. And, you know, this is very much my speed. I could easily be a computer engineer or a statistician, things like that. Very much drawn to the technical side of the school world, I guess, though I had no idea what I was going to do with it. People say, why don't you be an actuary? What's an actuary? You know, so I was like, I'm gonna feel out this interest. And then as I got a little bit further along in my college education, I was like, you know what? I'm a creative person too. I've always been a writer. I do short stories and I like to imagine things. And I have this aspect to my brain that doesn't make sense in this technical field. So after I got out of college, I actually decided to go to graduate school for creative writing. And I spent 3 years writing stories and working on a novel. And when I came out of that, I was like, I don't fit in a box. I have no idea what I'm going to do with myself. And when I had the opportunity to make a board game in a board game design competition, a light went on. I was like, I have the technical chops and I'm incredibly creative. And there is a world where other people like me who are a jack of all trades, like I think you said that, Heather, you know, someone like Brian who like is a hobbyist programmer and majored in English doesn't think I'm a total weirdo. And I love games because of that. You know, my first major job in the game industry is actually working at Eline Media and being a teacher. But I'm a very indie type of person. I love to bring things into being and see the whole span of the process. So I think that's actually why I've ended up in teaching as opposed to selecting a discipline like engineering or going into narrative design, which would be a logical pathway for me in a game studio. I want to do everything. And so teaching actually lets me like repeatedly make games because every student who makes a game, I see the whole thing. We start at the beginning with the idea. Then we say, how are we going to actually break this down into the component parts that we're going to implement in programming? And then we get artistic about the visuals and the sounds and the world that it's living in. And the really cool thing about teaching is I get to do all of that stuff on a micro level all the time. So it's a really, really fun space for me to be in because I don't have to pick, I don't have to be in a box, and I get to be with people, a really fun team who is just so into it in the same way that I think all of us are. It's such a cool industry to be in because everybody thinks it's fun. And I'm definitely one of the people that feels that way. So that's kind of my history. And I almost feel bubbly about it because I just want more people to join in and be on the team.
Perfect. Thank you guys very much for giving a little bit more background. And so there are definitely common threads that we're beginning to hear kind of about how to get into game making or like the paths that you need to take, which the common thread is you can follow your own path to find your way there, if nothing else. It's not necessarily something like Natalie said, which you don't have to be in a box. You can find your own way into it. One of the other things that we're very much hearing I'd like to kind of explore a little bit about is obviously that amongst you all, there is a deep passion for this. And it's not just the passion for your particular path, but it's a passion for the end goal as well, like people coming together and things like that, which leads to things being made better, specifically in this case, games. And so I'd like to explore a little bit about what each of you think makes for a good game, and then where people in the chat would be able to, like, where should they be drawing inspiration from? You've all come from very diverse backgrounds, so where does game inspiration came from, and what do you believe? And this is a very big question, so please try to limit your answers as to what makes a good game.
I guess I'll kick it off. For me, I think something that makes a good game is where you can sit down and kind of get lost in the experience. One of those, you look up and it's been half an hour, you've been engaged in your game. I prefer games where it have deep story and lots of things to explore. So I really love being transported into another world. And that was when I was younger. As I've gotten older and now I have a family, I have less time to play games. So now one of the things that I look for that makes a fun game is something that I can just do for 5 or 10 minutes. Again, it's an escapist element, but I can just kind of escape and relax, for a few minutes. I will say that I've been spending a lot of time playing Pokemon Go, and as I play that game quite a bit, I am so impressed with how they have really combined real world actions with in-game goals. And so for me, that is the type of game I would love to see more of, because it is the best of both worlds. Games sometimes get a bad rap because, and I have a child who spends a lot of time playing video games. You're sitting in front of a screen, just kind of transported and lost in your own world. But if you have a game like Pokemon Go, then you're actually out in the world and you're still having that escapist feeling, but you are now engaged with the world around you in a more concrete and meaningful way.
So I'll sort of make a captain of the obvious point, on top of that, right? But one of the things that makes games really different from other forms of entertainment, like plays or TV shows or movies or books, is they're interactive, right? And that's the master of the obvious comment. You do something when you play a game. You play an active role as a player in how the game unfolds, and the fun of a game comes from you being challenged to do stuff, right? And that's on one level, it's such an obvious point when I hear myself state it that way. But on the other level, as you sit down to make your game or think about what your game should be, think about what you want your players to do. Think about what actions they're going to take and what obstacles and challenges they're going to face in trying to achieve them. In game design, the term we use for that are mechanics. Mechanics are the things you do in a game, and you can always describe them with verbs like running or jumping or blasting or solving a puzzle, right? Think about what your verbs are for your game and how to find the fun and challenge coming out of those verbs.
Yeah, and if I just wanted to jump in real quick with an example, when we were working on Fortnite, which was a game that was in development for 6 years, and people may not realize that there's the Save the World component, which came before the Battle Royale. The Save the World component is you gather resources, you build shelters, and then you defend. So when you look at... Could you try again? I have no idea what that was. So when you gather resources... I don't know what's happening. So when you gather resources and you build structures and you defend, those are the 3 pillars in the game, and it forms a core game loop. Because once you finish defending your property, then you have to go back out and gather, build and defend again. And so really good games have a nice core loop like that, where you are doing somewhat of the same actions from a core standpoint, but then they add other little things and goals and verbs for you to continue to accomplish. This is why it's fun when you play a game that has daily objectives and other sorts of things in it.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, something I was thinking about hearing you guys talk about, coming up with the verbs of a game. And, specifically as applied to Fortnite, there are all these different kinds of things you can do. For me, what's important about that and what I really like is in a game is we get a lot of verbs, and then we get to decide how we use those verbs and in what order. And one thing I think is really, really cool about Fortnite is you have this opportunity to express yourself through mechanics. So I can build a shelter, but there are many ways I could do that. I can choose to do it at different times. I can do it for particular reasons. And what I love are games that include a component of what we like to call meaningful choice, which is that I'm not just on this, it's not like an amusement park ride where I'm on one track and I go up and down and it's exciting, but ultimately I just sit and wait. Because, we have that experience and, it's more like watching a movie or reading a book. And so, one of the ways that I love to dig into the concept of interactivity is thinking about the player and giving the player ways to be themselves through mechanics. So an example for me of a favorite game, of course, I did not work on this game. I just have played it a lot, is the game Terraria. Which for me is just a really great and similar in many ways to Fortnite, where you have lots of different verbs you can do in the game. It's sandboxy, it's got so much exploration, so many actions you can take. And the other aspect is that it's collaborative or competitive, depending on how you play. But there's an aspect where you can use the mechanics of the game to express yourself with other players. So other people get to see you use those verbs to express your personality. And if you want, you can work together, expressing yourselves to do all kinds of cool things like building houses or beating bosses. So I often feel like when I have these conversations with folks, it's like we're all talking about the same thing, but then like we all kind of are a little bit more magnetized towards different dimensions of this same core notion.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that for a second, Natalie, because I'll bring that back to the competition, a little bit, because I think a lot of us, I'm sure a lot of folks watching too, are attracted to sort of big, expansive, sandboxy kind of games. That's a very hard kind of game, to make. It's super hard to make a game as expansive or complex as Fortnite is, right? And we certainly don't expect folks in the competition who are making games, maybe even for the first time, to go ahead and make Terraria or Fortnite, right? But even in games that are relatively or are more constrained, or more the kind of games you might make the first time you're going out, a platformer game, right? A top-down adventure game in the old Legend of Zelda style, right? There are lots of ways to create, to have lots of mechanics and to create choice in them, right? Just the choice of build your level, your platformer level, so you're not always just going from left to right, right? You can explore in different, directions. That there are things to find, that you encourage players to go everywhere in your world of your adventure game, even if it's a relatively small world, right? Those are all things you can do and think about in the design of your game, even if you've never made a game before.
Yeah, I actually have a great example for this, which is if you've ever played the game Hollow Knight, that game started out as a game jam game, which is, if you've never heard of a game jam, it's not altogether that different from this challenge. It's shorter, it happens in a weekend, and people spend about 3 days putting together a game prototype. So if you're interested in seeing the prototype that they started out with on the very long, very involved Hollow Knight project, you can look up Hollow Knight Game Jam on Google, and you'll see the kind of prototype that's realistic to do for a challenge like this. And you can imagine making such a prototype and then later with a team and a producer like Heather, then making a really complicated, massive Metroidvania with beautiful precision platforming controls and a wonderful art set like Hollow Knight. So definitely check out that prototype if you guys get a chance, because it's a beautiful a tour of the process. And this challenge, I think Brian is saying, you're starting right at the beginning.
Okay, so I'm going to revisit we're going to have to shorten up some of these answers because we do have a lot of ground to cover and we are running a little bit out of time. Just for everybody who's still hanging out in the chat, please remember that Eric is chilling with us there. And so if you've got questions for the group, we're definitely going to be asking them at the end here. We've heard a lot about the background of various people who can get into game making following different paths, and sort of the inspiration they can find in what you all believe makes a good game. And I think a lot of the folks that we've got hanging out in the chat want to know how, which is a really, really big question. And so if we're looking at things like, how do I start making a game? What skills do I need to start making a game? Where can I acquire those skills to make a game? I'd like to kind of narrow those three down to what skills does the team need? Because it's not, you can't expect that everybody's going to have every skill set necessary to make a game. So what would be some base skills that should be on a game making team? And then where should people go about perhaps learning more or acquiring those particular skills?
All right, I'll start off. So definitely in a competition like this, you need to have, I think with this particular competition, you are allowed to turn in a game design document. So the number one skill is good communication skills and an ability to convey your ideas in a way that is clear for other people. So if you're writing a game design document, you need to think about what are the key points of the concept and the story and characters. What are the key gameplay mechanics that you would engage with, and how can I communicate these in a very clear way? When you make a game design document, you also want to create some pictures that perhaps show it. And don't worry if you're not like a fancy concept artist. There are things that you can do with programs out there. I can't think of a good example right now, but Natalie might be able to have some where you can just put together some sort of like blocks and lines that say, okay, here's how the game would be laid out. We're going to have this screen and you'll be able to push these buttons and it's going to do these things. So if you're focusing on a game design document for this challenge, I would say have good communication skills, have people work with you to hone your ideas, to get feedback on them so that you're clearly communicating it, and then have an ability to be able to decide with a picture how you want to communicate the gameplay mechanics. If you are going to be using a tool like Scratch or an Unreal Engine, you need to have a little bit of technical knowledge, which there's plenty of tutorials out there to show you how to do that. You need to be a little bit familiar with some digital art programs. And you also, I would say, need to have played quite a few games. I think that goes for anything. You learn so much by actually playing games, not just the games that you like to play, but also you learn a lot by playing games that you don't enjoy and also playing games that people consider bad. There's no better way to learn how not to do something than to play games that are examples of that.
Yep, and I can just elaborate a little bit on some resources you might start out with. If you've ever seen the web series Extra Credits, that would be a great place to start in getting a grounding in some of the basic game design. So things like coming up with mechanics would be something you could explore through Extra Credits and focus in on different aspects of games, which include both digital and non-digital games. It's a whole discipline that is applied in video games. If you're not super technical starting out, that's not a barrier because of programs like Scratch. Scratch is, of course, where you would see those code blocks that you can drag and drop. GameStar Mechanic is another fantastic platform you can use to make games without any coding knowledge. And GameStar Mechanic will actually teach you how to do game design as well if you play through the free quests that come with an account when you sign up. So on the side of something like Unreal Engine or Unity, indeed, you would need a little more technical expertise and would be spending part of your time for this challenge learning the tool if you don't know how to use it already. Luckily, Unity has a lot of great learning tools that you can dive into with videos, tutorials. There's a whole set of great materials on Unity's website called Create with Code that will give you a template to start out with and a basis to start learning C#, which is the programming language associated with Unity. But what I would say is the game design stuff is really the most important. Knowing what a game is, knowing the mechanics you want to use, and then picking a tool that fits with where you're at with computers at the start of the challenge.
And I'll just point out quickly that all of the tools Natalie mentioned, and many more resources, including online courses, for if any parents or teachers are watching, parent and teacher curricula resources, you can find links to a bunch of different stuff on the Code Games Challenge website at codegameschallenge.org/resources. And all of the resources you'll see listed there are freely available ones. So including the game making platforms, including the educational resources, all of the things you'll see there. You can play, try out, make games, submit them to the competition for free.
Perfect, thanks. We do know that the folks in the chat right now are actually doing a lot of talking amongst themselves in terms of potentially teaming up to do some game challenge or participate in the game challenge itself. So I think this would probably be a pretty good time. Brian, if you want to lay out a little bit more about the challenge and give some details in terms of like dates and things, so they can kind of keep that in mind while they're already planning and plotting.
For sure. So the Code Games Challenge is a game making competition that is open to young people around the world between the ages of 10 and 18. So if you're in that age range, you can make a game for the competition. You have lots of options about how you go about that. So first of all, you can make a game individually, or you can make a game with up to 3 other people as part of a team, right? The only restrictions on that are obviously all the people on the team have to be eligible to enter the competition. And the competition overall is divided into 2 age brackets. So there's one for if you're 10 to 13, and there's one if you're 14 to 18. And so if you're going to work as a team, all the people on a team have to be within the same age bracket. You can make a game using any game making tool that you want. We have special competition tracks for all of the tools that are listed on the resources page, some of which Natalie mentioned a few minutes ago. And the reason we do that is because the capabilities of different tools are so different. What you can do with Scratch or GameStar Mechanic, which are introductory learning tools, is more limited than what you could do with Unity or Unreal, but those are very, are professional grade, more involved tools. We don't like to judge games made with very different tool sets like that against each other. You can also, if you don't have access to or have limited access to technology, you can, as Heather mentioned, create a written game design document, and we have a separate track for those. And then lastly, your game can be about any topic you want. So wherever your imagination takes you, you can make your game about that. However, we have 3 thematic tracks to the competition, which our friends at X Prize have aligned with sort of their major themes as an organization. If you know anything about X Prize, many of their competitions and their efforts are around these, and those themes are exploration, environment, and equity. And if you check out the website, you'll see a little bit more about how you might interpret those. So if you choose to make a game about one of those themes, that's awesome. Prize-wise, the prizes are if you make a game about one of those themes, you are in competition to win a $2,000 grand prize. If you make a game not about one of those themes, about any other theme, you are eligible to win a $1,000 US dollar prize. The competition runs between May 14th of this year, so it's we're already about a month and a half in, and through October 14th of this year. So you must register at the codegameschallenge.org website, work on your game between now and then, and get it submitted by uploading it to the Code Games Challenge website by October 14th. Following that, we have a judging process where all the games in the different tracks get reviewed and judged. And so we expect to get through that process and announce winners early in 2021.
Perfect, thank you. Judging by chat, that was definitely some information that was necessary and needed, and sparking a little bit more of ideas is, we've sort of covered this so we can kind of go a little bit deeper, is where to start. If somebody's never coded before, how can they learn? And like, where to actually start really kind of pushing on something like that?
As a producer, I think that you do want to kind of come up with some sort of process so that you're not overwhelmed by trying to do all the things at once. So I would start by picking a concept that you think would be fun. And I remember a while ago I had heard a talk by Miyamoto, the guy who did Donkey Kong and Mario, and he suggested that you find something that you know really well and you're really passionate about and see if there's a theme there that you could mine for making a game. And that's kind of how he approaches his game design. So he focuses in on sort of what concept or idea, and then thinks about what audience he is going to design this game for. Is it for kids? Is it for adults? So you think about who you want to make the game for, what you want your concept to be, and then you start finding things of inspiration. It might be fun to cut out pictures from magazines, if people still do that, or to put up a Pinterest board that has different ideas and art styles that inspire you. And as you kind of form that pre-concept phase, then you can start looking at sort of the main concept. Okay, now that I kind of have the game world and the characters, and I kind of know who I'm going to make the game for, what are the actual mechanics that I want to do? And before you get too deep in mechanics, it's a good idea to make a simple prototype. Natalie can talk a little bit more about that, but you'll want to make something that you can play and that you can show other people, because this concept phase is the best time to get feedback from people. And then after you kind of get those core mechanics decided, then you can figure out, okay, how am I going to build more around this game? I've got the core mechanics. Now I want to build some additional goals and objectives for the player. I want to add in a bit more content, maybe another level or some characters, and then get feedback on that. And then once you're at that phase, you can start iterating on that prototype and continue making it better. And so you've approached it in sort of bite-sized chunks as you go through. And this is something that you can do over the course of a couple months, because if you start now, you'll have a good amount of time to iterate and get feedback and really figure out what you want to do. You might want to prototype 2 to 3 different ideas and see which one seems like one you want to move forward with.
Yep. It's all about getting that prototype and having feedback, right, Heather?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the most important thing from my perspective, and as someone who's made a lot of games with people in this age group, is let people play your game before it's done. You know, we do that in the game industry, and, you know, even if you're making a game solo, you should still give your game to somebody, even if it has bugs, even if it has terrible art, you know, even if you don't have a pause menu or background music, let someone try it. Because this thing you're talking about, which is the core mechanic, this central thing that you do when you play the game, you got to find out if that's fun as soon as you can, you know, and the only way you can really find out if it's fun is to let someone else play the game. Because, you know, you get in the weeds, right? We're code blocking, or we're mapping, or we're programming, and we stop having a perspective on whether or not it's fun. Because what we care about is that the competition is fun. X Prize is fun. Doing the challenge is fun. And we need someone that's outside that to just say, is this game that you've made a fun experience? So, you know, above all, you know, you take your idea, you make a version of it as quickly as possible, and then you let people give feedback on it. You know, that's absolutely going to be the key to making something that at the end of the day, when you submit it to this challenge, that you are proud of.
I want to jump in a little bit. Oh, sorry, Brian. About ideas. When I have worked with kids, sometimes they'll say, I don't want to tell my idea. It's, I want to keep it to myself because I'm worried that someone's going to copy it or do something with it. And what I say is if you're going to make games, you're going to have to come up with 1,000 ideas. And maybe one of them will actually turn into a game. And so you can't be afraid. An idea is just something that you have put out in the world, but it's the execution on the idea that makes it into a game. So you could work with somebody that has a very similar idea than you, but they're going to go in a very different direction with it. So I would say to be successful in the game industry, you have to be willing to collaborate. You have to be willing to share ideas and understand that people are going to take the same thoughts and do very different things with them.
So I'll address another aspect, Steve, of your question, which is, so if you've never programmed before, how do you get into that? How is that involved in the competition? So first of all, I agree very strongly with what both Natalie and Heather have said, which is there's the figuring out what your game should be and designing it part of it. And then there's the coding it and making the art and doing that stuff part of it. And it kind of helps to have a little bit of separation between those phases. Because if you're still figuring out what the game is supposed to be and what the design is supposed to be while you're coding it, that usually is not a great way to fly. And that usually leads to bad games and confusing technical implementations. But with that sort of warning in mind, if you've never coded before, now is a great time to try. First of all, as Natalie mentioned earlier, a number of the tools you can use in the competition, like the ones listed on the resources page, don't require coding. Many of the other tools that do have coding to them have learning content built into the tool. That's true of something like Scratch. That's true of the Endless Mission, which is a platform our company Eline Media makes that's available to use in the competition, which is sort of designed to teach you 3D game making and let you make 3D games on a pathway to learning like for reals, full on Unity. That's a great way to get in because you can often start with not only the learning materials, but the systems that those games already have built into them that you can then build upon, and it sort of gives you a leg up. I personally think that kind of approach, which like when somebody mods a game, that's kind of what they do, right? That sort of approach often is a lot easier for folks who are new to coding to pick things up with than always starting with a blank page or always going through and following the sort of textbook, here's how you learn to code. It's great to see things in action, start with them, learn from them, and build on them.
Cool, thank you. Kind of building off of that and throwing this one to Natalie, we've got a question from TF in the chat, which is, what are the best ways to learn what you were teaching from our homes? And so while we covered maybe some of those, a little bit more of details and perhaps some tips and tricks for at-home learning to kind of settle into this new reality that we all kind of exist in at the moment would be very helpful for the group.
Sure, yeah. So of course, there's two things going on here. One is I want to make a game for the challenge. And the other one is I have this general goal of learning game making. And those are happening together in this situation, which is honestly ideal. Because what I always say is the best way to learn game making is to try to make a game. And if you say, I'm going to make a game, and you sit down and actually think, okay, what do I need to do first? That will often naturally lead you in the direction of what you need to learn next, right? Which is different for different people. Some people need to learn the coding. Other folks need to focus in on the game design side, where we focus in on things like meaningful choice and mechanics. So starting out, I would say, let your project be your guide. What do I want to make? What do I want to make it with is the place you start. And then once you've made some of those initial decisions, like say you said, I want to make a 2D game and I don't want to code, right? In that situation, you might say, okay, great. Scratch or GameStar Mechanic is going to be a great place for me to start. I'm going to focus in on learning game design in 2D and study some of the game design principles around 2D genres like a side-scrolling platformer such as Mario. But on the other side of things, if you said, I'm really interested in making a game like Fortnite or Rocket League or something that looks big and beautiful in 3D, maybe a smaller prototype than those games, but you have that vision in your head, then you're going to sit down and say, I need to start out with my Create with Code and Unity learning resources, or even better, hop into the Endless Mission, which will really help you learn Unity or Unreal smoothly by teaching you the basics of development in 3D. As Brian said, we have a lot of resources linked on the page for this challenge. And, if you go to the resources page, you'll see we have a sort of tour of a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Iterating, prototyping, feedback, working with a team, all of those are elements of it. But you really can't go wrong if you go to that page and click on a link that sounds interesting to you. There's things like Harvard University has a free online introductory game development course that you could hop into if you want to go in that direction. Girls Who Code has some code at home weekly coding activities that are for online learning if you do want to go the engineering route. But when we start to toss around resources, it quickly expands out because there's actually so much on the internet, and learning on the internet is a great way of learning game making because there's just so much out there, and computers are what you're making games for in the first place anyway. So to sort all that out, again, what I would say is, what game do I want to make? What platform do I want to make it on? And then when you've narrowed that down, look at the resources that are associated with that game type and that platform. And of course, you could also say, I want to start with a platform and make whatever kind of game fits on that platform. You can select one or the other. But when I'm teaching folks in my in-person studios, we talk about that. We say, like Heather said, share your ideas. And then, given that this is the thing we're interested in, this is what we need to learn to be able to do it.
Perfect. And Eric's going to be tossing that link into the chat right now. It is codegameschallenge.org. There's a resources tab that Natalie just mentioned, so you'll be able to check that out as well. So please feel free to peruse and things like that. We're coming up towards the end of our time here. Obviously, if there's a lot of interest, it doesn't mean that we can't do one of these again. But before we start to break and kind of wrap up and do the details again, I'd love to be able to get a one-line answer from each of you about just what you think, and you can spend some time thinking about it, your best piece of advice for somebody who'd be new into game making. So we all work we all work in game studios, and we get a lot of emails from people who would like to be interns, from people who are just starting, who are either coming in as QA, so our quality assistants and our checks folks, or who are coming in because they're shifting from programming into coding and game making because they have a passion for it. And a lot of those things, and we see it at conventions that we travel to, and I've worked shows with many of you, and it's, what is that one line of advice that you would like to give to people who are trying to make their first game and get into the game industry?
So while Natalie and Heather are thinking about their answers, I'll just briefly touch on it because Steve alluded to it. We will be doing more of these webinars. We've got some plans we're putting together to do sort of a series of these, talking about some other topics that'll be relevant as folks continue to design their games for the challenge. Ways to get some feedback, talking with other folks in the industry about the process, actually getting direct feedback on games if folks want to submit them. So we'll be posting a schedule of those on the codegameschallenge.org website. So if you dug this and you want to see more of it, please check back there because we'll be having some more.
All right. So if you're interested in making games, I would definitely say you need to play games. And I gave this advice before, but play all types of games and learn what they are. But I think also you want to think about sort of the attitude you have towards making games, because when I talk with kids, like what's going to make me be successful? And I'd say it's got to be a focus, a flexibility, and a fierceness, kind of corny, but the focus on, I want to make games. So hone in on that, learn as much as you can, talk to people about it, reach out to people, find mentors. Flexibility, everything's never going to go the way that you want it to go. Your prototypes are not going to be great. People are not going to like your game. Be okay with that and be flexible and changing things. And then the fierceness is just, especially for women and girls that we're trying to get encouraged to come into the game industry, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and say, look, I'm here. I've got ideas. I want to share my games with people. And if people are like, ugh, that's a dumb idea, it doesn't matter, because if you believe in it and you want your voice heard, you can go out there and make that happen.
Couldn't agree more with that. I feel like mine is a good companion to that. And my one-liner is, making games takes longer than you think. So yeah, I mean, that's self-explanatory, but I think that the kind of passion and dedication and sort of inner strength that Heather is alluding to relates with sticking with it and, putting in hours and hours of work and not having it look this beautiful way that you imagine. That is the struggle. It is a real one. And that's the thing I think that gives us a feeling of kinship and team culture, is that we all struggle with that together.
And I think my one-liner, I have a lot of them, but I'll give you this one, is games are never finished, they're only abandoned. And what I mean by that, which is the thing I've heard from folks in the industry, but it's really true, is, and I think this is something that if you're a young person, you haven't made games before, and you're sort of used to the kind of assignments you do in school, where it's like I hand in a term paper or I take a test and then I'm done with it. That's not how games work, right? You can always make your game better by continuing to test it, have other people play it, working on it, and making changes. Every game, you've probably experienced it as a player, almost every game that ships has bugs in it. And that's why you download, the update, right? So that's why there's sometimes an update on day one that the game is out there that you're forced to download. No professional game team ever is like, oh man, we finished the game a month early and now we're going to go to the beach, right? No, that never happens. It always is the case that you have less time than you'd like, because the more you work on it and the more you iterate, keep working on things and making them better, the better it will be. So don't just assume when you get the very first version of your game that works that it's done and ready to submit. Test it. Take feedback from the players you test it with, your friends, your family, teammates if you're working on a team, and use it to make the game better, and give yourself time before the competition deadline to do that.
All right, and on that note, we're going to start bringing this to a close. I'd like to thank everybody in chat who's been participating, who's talking back and forth. Hopefully you guys are coming up with some great teams and ideas and are going to stay in touch with each other. Like Brian said, pay attention to various social media outlets, from XPRIZE Connect to Eline Media. We're going to be doing a lot of announcements regarding another series of these, getting into more specific topics and things like that. You could always check out, and it's definitely in the chat channels, codegameschallenge.org. Look at the resources that Natalie mentioned. You can take out the different types of entries that you could participate in that Heather mentioned. So if you're not coding and you just want to be able to write a good game design concept, we encourage you to do that. In the meantime, you will also find all of the contact information for reaching out to us to learn a little bit more about the challenge and registering yourself. So again, on behalf of all of our panel participants here today, Heather, Brian, and Natalie, and Eric behind the scenes, we want to say thank you very much for joining us, and we are looking forward to seeing and playing your games. It is one of the best ways